Story 1. The Boy Who Wasn't Himself. In the fall of 2008, the Carter family arrived in a sleepy Ohio suburb, their lives upended by a military reassignment that had uprooted them from their old home. Their new house was a modest two-story affair, its faded yellow siding blending into the uniformity of the neighborhood, where every lawn was trimmed to perfection and every porch bore the weight of predictable routine. For 9-year-old George Carter, the move was a fresh start, a chance to leave behind the teasing he'd endured at his old school. Outgoing and quick with a smile, George was the kind of kid who could charm anyone, his chatter filling the house with warmth. His mother, Ellen, a pragmatic woman with a knack for keeping things together, was optimistic. She'd met the other parents at school events, their upstanding demeanors reassuring her that George would find his place. But beneath the surface of this tranquil town, a shadow was stirring, one that would test the Carters' sense of safety and sanity. George settled into 4th grade with ease, his teacher praising his enthusiasm and his classmates drawn to his easygoing nature. Among them was Sebastian, a wiry boy with pale skin and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. George spoke of him often, his voice bright as he recounted their games of make-believe, casting themselves as Street Fighter characters on the playground. Ellen was pleased. Sebastian's mother, Maggie, seemed kind, her voice over the phone warm and genuine. But there was something about Sebastian that Ellen couldn't quite place, a fleeting intensity in his gaze when she saw him at school, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The first crack in the facade came 3 months after the move. Ellen's phone rang in the middle of a quiet afternoon, the school's number flashing on the screen. The principal's voice was calm but firm, requesting her presence to discuss an incident involving George and another student. Her heart sank as she drove to the school, her mind racing with possibilities. George had never been in trouble before. Physical altercations were as foreign to him as silence was to his chatter. When she arrived, George sat in the waiting room, his usual vibrancy replaced by a stillness that chilled her. He refused to answer her questions, his eyes fixed on the floor, and Ellen's frustration mingled with a growing unease. In the principal's office, the story unfolded like a riddle. George and Sebastian had been the last 2 students outside after recess, climbing the concrete stairs to the school's entrance. According to Sebastian, George had pulled an eraser from his pocket and struck him over the head, sending him tumbling to the ground in a fit of screams. The principal admitted no one had witnessed the event, but both boys' accounts aligned, and the matter was deemed a minor scuffle. George wasn't in trouble, but Ellen was baffled. The act was so unlike her son, especially toward a friend he adored. As they drove home, George remained silent, his refusal to speak a stark contrast to his usual oversharing. It wasn't until bedtime, under the weight of Ellen's frustration, that he finally opened up. His words came in a rush, his voice trembling. Sebastian had tricked him, he said. They'd been playing Street Fighter, and Sebastian had instructed George to use the eraser for a KO move. When George complied, Sebastian collapsed, feigning injury, then whispered a chilling threat. If George didn't pretend to have attacked him, Sebastian would hurt him badly. Terrified, George had gone along with the lie, and the teachers, unaware of the ruse, believed it was a fight. Ellen's blood ran cold. Her son, her bright, trusting boy, had been manipulated, his fear used against him. She resolved to handle it herself, bypassing the school's bureaucracy. That night, Ellen found Maggie's number in the school directory and called. Maggie's voice was as warm as ever, and she admitted Sebastian had confessed the truth, claiming she'd already disciplined him. Ellen was surprised. Why would Sebastian admit his deception so quickly? But relieved. Maggie explained that Sebastian had always struggled with behavioral issues, sometimes acting as if he were someone else entirely. She suggested a sleepover to mend the boys' friendship, offering to host, and Ellen, softened by Maggie's sincerity, agreed. That weekend, she drove George to Maggie's house, a tidy ranch-style home with a well-kept garden. Maggie welcomed them warmly, and over glasses of wine, the 2 mothers bonded, the hours slipping away. George and Sebastian played in the basement, their laughter echoing up the stairs, and Ellen felt a flicker of hope, but curiosity nagged at her. She asked about Sebastian's behavior, and Maggie's demeanor shifted. her voice lowering. She admitted he'd seen doctors for his struggles, all of whom believed he'd outgrow them. He'd had trouble making friends, she said, but was improving. Reassured, Ellen left George for the night, confident in Maggie's care. The next morning, she returned to find George waiting by the door, his backpack slung over his shoulder and a smile on his face. Maggie waved cheerfully, and Ellen assumed the night had gone well. But as they drove away, George's smile vanished, replaced by sobs that shook his small frame. Through tears, he recounted a night that turned Ellen's stomach. The boys had set up air mattresses in the basement, the evening filled with games and laughter. But in the dead of night, George woke to a faint whispering, the sound drifting from the bathroom. Its door was ajar, a flickering light, candle-like, not electric, casting eerie shadows. Sebastian was inside, speaking in a low, deliberate tone, as if in conversation. But he wasn't on the phone. He was alone, addressing himself as Mr. Jim, in a voice that wasn't his own. George froze, the realization dawning that Sebastian believed he was someone else. The candle went out, plunging the basement into darkness, and George pretended to sleep, his heart pounding. Minutes stretched into eternity until the bathroom door creaked open. The whispering resumed, closer now, directly above George. The words were unintelligible, not English, a guttural murmur that seemed to crawl under his skin. Too terrified to move, George lay still until Sebastian finally returned to his mattress, acting as if nothing had happened. In the morning, Sebastian was his usual self, and George, too scared to confront him, said nothing. Ellen's horror was palpable. This wasn't a game or a quirk. Something was deeply wrong with Sebastian. She called Maggie immediately, recounting George's story. Maggie laughed it off at first, calling Sebastian creative, but as Ellen pressed, her tone faltered. She admitted Sebastian's issues were more serious, mentioning a psychiatrist's suspicion of multiple personality disorder and 2 prior school expulsions. Ellen's anger flared. Why hadn't Maggie warned her? Maggie begged her not to tell the school, citing their fresh start, and Ellen, torn, agreed to decide later. But before she could, Sebastian attacked another student at recess, the incident severe enough to warrant expulsion. Ellen tried to reach Maggie, but her phone was disconnected. Driven by unease, she visited Maggie's house only to find it empty, no trace of the family left behind. The sudden disappearance was chilling, as if Maggie and Sebastian had never existed. Years later, Ellen still wonders about that night, the boy who called himself Mr. Jim, and what might have happened in that basement. George has moved on, but for Ellen, the memory lingers like a shadow, a reminder that even in the safest places, darkness can wear a familiar face. Story 2, The Woman in the Dark. In the humid summer of 1987, 16-year-old Clara lived on the edge of a small Alabama town where the air was thick with cicada song and the weight of Southern Baptist doctrine. Her childhood home was a weathered clapboard house, its paint peeling under the relentless sun, a reflection of the fractured family within. Clara's upbringing was steeped in the church's fire and brimstone teachings, where demons were as real as the pew she sat in every Sunday. Her father, a deacon, preached that strange occurrences were the work of dark forces, a belief Clara clung to for structure amid chaos. Her mother, Diane, was different, a restless soul who rejected faith with a casual indifference, her life marred by addiction and untreated mental illness. Some days, Diane was a loving mother. Others, she was a stranger, her eyes wild with an intensity that scared Clara to her core. The first incident came after a vivid nightmare. Clara dreamed of Diane bursting into her room, her face contorted with rage, shaking her violently as she screamed incoherent accusations. Clara woke in a sweat, her body rigid with fear, only to hear the door slam open moments later. Diane stood in the threshold, her expression mirroring the nightmare, her voice spitting the same words. Clara's scream halted the onslaught and Diane retreated, leaving Clara trembling. The next morning, Diane had no memory of the event, her confusion genuine, and Clara tried to dismiss it as a coincidence. But the seed of doubt was planted, her faith whispering of darker possibilities. Weeks later, a scream from the backyard shattered the afternoon's quiet. Clara rushed outside, freezing at the sight of Diane standing in the grass, grinning maniacally as she held a 7-foot snake in her bare hands. Clara's stomach churned. Diane's phobia of snakes was legendary, her fear so intense she couldn't watch them on television. Yet there she was, gripping the writhing creature like a trophy, her eyes gleaming with an unnatural excitement. "Come here," Diane called, beckoning Clara to touch it. Clara backed away, her voice shaking as she demanded answers. But Diane's smile only widened, her head tilting in a way that felt predatory. Unable to bear it, Clara fled inside, locking herself in her room. When she later confronted Diane, her mother shrugged, claiming it was a dream, her denial as unsettling as the act itself. The church lock-in that winter was meant to be Clara's escape, a night of games and fellowship with kids her age. Diane dropped her off, sober and affectionate, kissing her forehead before driving away. At 4:30 a.m., as the group settled into sleeping bags in the chapel, a loud knocking echoed through the building. It wasn't random. The sound circled the structure, rhythmic and deliberate, as if someone or something was testing every entrance. The other teens exchanged nervous glances, the air thick with unease. Clara ran to wake the pastor, who was asleep in his office, and as he entered the chapel, the knocking ceased. He opened the front doors, stumbling back in shock. There stood Diane, barefoot in the freezing night, her clothes disheveled and her hair matted with sweat. Her lips moved silently, her eyes fixed on Clara with an intensity that made her skin crawl. A slow, unnatural smile spread across Diane's face as she stepped forward, ignoring the pastor's protests. Clara wanted to run, but her legs felt leaden, as if drawn to her mother by an invisible force. The pastor whispered for her to stay, but Clara climbed into Diane's car, fear choking her voice. The drive home was silent, Diane's gaze fixed on the road, her refusal to speak deafening. At home, she paused in the doorway, staring at Clara with an unreadable expression before disappearing into the house. The next morning, Diane was in the kitchen, humming as she cooked breakfast, oblivious to the previous night. She claimed she was about to pick Clara up, her shock at Clara's presence genuine. No one from the church mentioned the incident, their silence a tacit agreement to ignore what they couldn't explain. Years later, Diane's death left Clara grappling with the memories. She tells herself it was mental illness, schizophrenia, addiction, something rational. But the eerie timing, the dream that became reality, and the woman who wasn't herself haunt her still. In the quiet of her adult life, Clara wonders if her father's demons were more than metaphor, their presence lingering in the shadows of her past. Story 3, The Mirror in the Wall. In the rolling hills of upstate New York, the Thompson family lived in a century-old farmhouse, its creaking floors and drafty windows a testament to its age. For Laura Thompson, the house was a haven, a place where she raised her 2 sons, Ethan and Caleb, with her husband, Mark. The boys were 6 years apart, Ethan the elder at 9 when the strangeness began. Laura, a light sleeper attuned to every sound, first noticed Ethan sleepwalking in the dead of winter, 2005. She'd wake to find him in the hallway, his small frame swaying, eyes open but vacant, as if staring into a void. His movements were deliberate, his heels lifting slightly as he shifted his weight, a rhythm that unnerved her. She'd guide him back to bed, whispering reassurances, but the emptiness in his gaze lingered in her mind. The sleepwalking was sporadic, a phase she attributed to childhood quirks. But one night, Laura woke to a rhythmic tapping, like water dripping on glass, though the skies were clear. The sound was steady, deliberate, emanating from the hallway. She found Ethan facing the wall, his forehead knocking against it in slow, measured taps, his fingertips grazing the surface in sync. The sight was chilling, his movements too precise for unconsciousness. She called his name, her voice barely audible, but he didn't respond. Hesitating, she touched his shoulder, snapping him out of the trance. He blinked, confused, and let her lead him to bed. No memory of the event come morning. Ethan outgrew the sleepwalking, and Laura pushed the memory aside, chalking it up to a phase. But years later, when Caleb was 8, the pattern repeated. Laura woke to find him in the hallway, swaying in the same eerie rhythm, his eyes unfocused. The familiarity was uncanny, a replay of Ethan's behavior. She brushed it off as genetics, but the precision of Caleb's movements gnawed at her. Then one night, the tapping returned. Laura's heart sank as she stepped into the hallway, knowing what she'd find. Caleb stood in the exact spot Ethan had, his forehead knocking against the wall, fingers brushing in rhythm. She called his name, touched his shoulder, but he remained locked in his trance, swaying as if drawn to something beyond the wall. Only after persistent shaking did he blink awake, unaware of his actions. The realization hit Laura like a blow. Caleb had never seen Ethan sleepwalk. Ethan's episodes had stopped years before Caleb was old enough to notice. Yet Caleb mimicked the exact behavior, down to the spot on the wall. The impossibility of it churned her stomach. Like Ethan, Caleb outgrew the sleepwalking, and life moved on. The boys grew, left for college, and the house grew quiet. To fill the silence, Laura and Mark decided to renovate, stripping old wallpaper to refresh the aging home. As they peeled back layers in the hallway, Laura's breath caught. Beneath the paper was an antique mirror, its ornate frame tarnished but intact, hidden for reasons unknown. The mirror's position was chilling. It aligned perfectly with the spot where both boys had tapped, their unconscious bodies drawn to it years apart. Laura's mind reeled. There was no way they could have known it was there, buried under decades of wallpaper. The discovery felt like a violation, as if the house itself had kept a secret. She removed the mirror immediately, its weight heavy in her hands, but the unease lingered. Laura tells herself there's a rational explanation. Subconscious cues, genetic quirks. But the mirror's presence, and the boy's inexplicable connection to it, haunts her. In the quiet of her renovated home, she wonders what drew her sons to that hidden glass, and whether it was truly empty when they stared into it.